we hear in the gospel today with a story in another book of the Bible, one with which perhaps many of us are not very familiar. And that's the book entitled The Wisdom of Jesus ben Sirach. In that book, we read this short story. There is a man who is rich through his diligence and self-denial. And this is the reward allotted to him when he says, I have found rest now, and I shall enjoy my goods. He does not know how much time will pass until he leaves them to others and dies. Psalm 39 reflects a similar theme. We read, surely a man goes about as a shadow. Surely for naught are they in turmoil. A man heaps up and knows not who will gather. In the book of Ecclesiastes, we also read, I hated all my toil in which I toiled under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be a wise man or a fool. Yet he will be master of all for which I have toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. It seems that the idea that wealth and possessions can seduce us to embrace a false sense of security, only to be thwarted by that great equalizer, death, was widely traveled. This idea widely traveled, both in the Greek and the Jewish worlds. Luke's version of the story, which we hear as our gospel reading today, is a rather simple one, actually. A rich man lives as if there is no tomorrow, only to learn to his great embarrassment that there really isn't. Simple enough. Or is it? Or is it? Jesus does not simply tell us the same story here about a rich man who, though greedy for gain, dies leaving behind great wealth for others to argue over. The parable of the rich fool portrays a man who in many ways is exemplary. He's a person who works, plans, saves, and seeks to protect his belongings. All laudable qualities. He expects to enjoy what is required and to make his future as secure as possible. Again, all laudable qualities. Persons who conduct their lives in such a manner, caring for themselves and for those who depend upon them, are considered prudent and good stewards of what has been entrusted to them. Persons who give no thought for the future, either for themselves or for those around them, are considered less prudent. The flaw that besets this rich fool was not a life of work and prudence. The key to Jesus' meaning is found in verse 20 of today's reading. Most translators render it thus. But God said to him, Fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? But that's not exactly what the Greek text says. Literally, in Greek, the sentence reads, Fool, they exact your soul from you. The subject is not your soul or your life. The Greek word used for those terms here can be interpreted either. Indeed, it cannot be, or it's in the wrong case to agree with the sentence structure in Greek. The subject of the sentence in Greek is clearly they. What Jesus is actually saying here is they are demanding your very life from you. The fundamental question then is who is they? It's not the angels of death. In the context, the answer is, of course, all the goods, all the things, all the stuff that this rich man has been so concerned with, and about which he's prepared to build even bigger barns to accommodate them all. And so one could translate this verse number 20 this way. Fool, this night They shall require your very life from you. Now, who owns whom? Who owns whom? That he was consumed by his possessions, and that the meaning and value of his life depended upon them is quite clear. The man and his possessions are so intimately tied together that they are inseparable. Did you notice that in the 6 verses of today's reading, in English, the personal pronoun I shows up 6 times in 6 verses, and the possessive my 5 times. My barns, my grain, my goods, my soul. And so Jesus' version of this well-traveled story does not simply serve the same truism as more ancient versions of the story do, namely that you can't take it with you. Note carefully that in Jesus' story, the man does not die. He lives. And for Jesus, the worst thing about putting all your effort in stuff is not that you might die before you can have a chance to enjoy it, but that you might, in fact, live and to regret it. Look at how it dominates his life. He's launched a demolition and construction program to support it all. He lies awake at night, terrified that someone might slip in and steal his things. He does not own his stuff. It is the stuff that owns him. Ironic, is it not? One of the reasons that you and I pursue monetary gain is for independence. There's even that phrase, we wish to be independently wealthy. Well, this man certainly is wealthy, but he's anything but independent. And the opposite also can be quite true. Some years ago, there was a woman living here in Segundo. She lived on the streets of our city. She lived in a van. Some of you may remember her. She was parked that van in front of us here all the time. I even allowed her for a while. I encountered her through the CASE program, our community effort here to assist those in need. I encountered her through that program. I even allowed her to live for some time in the upper room here. She had absolutely no possessions, yet she defined herself in terms of that lack of possessions. I'll never forget one day when she was so depressed and she was crying and everything else. She said, "Father, I have no life." I said, "What do you mean you have no life?" She said, "I have no life because I don't own anything." Her life was defined by her lack of possessions, just as the man in today's Gospel's life was defined by his abundance of possessions. And Friday night, I attended the opening of the SIKH, S-I-K-H Film Festival, and there was a marvelous film shown entitled A Little Revolution. And it's actually a documentary, and it pointed out that, and I had no idea this, in India today, every 32 minutes, a farmer commits suicide. Why? Because of the great poverty there. And the fact that these farmers can't make it. They're buried under tons of debt. They have no possessions. They cannot pay their taxes. They cannot pay their fees for the grain and all this other stuff, seeds they need to plant. And so they, having no life, because their life is defined in terms of possessions, they too eliminate themselves. Jesus' story is not simply about greed. It starts out being about greed, and greed clearly precipitates the issue. But the issue that concerns Jesus here is far more basic. Not included for some unknown reason in the lectionary reading today are the 3 verses which precede it. In those verses, a man comes to Jesus and asks him to intercede with his brother, to tell his brother to share the inheritance with him. Jesus replies to the man, "Who made me judge and divider over you?" And then Jesus reminds him of a proverb. Take heed and beware of all covetousness, for a man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. And then he tells this parable of the rich fool. This parable then serves as an illustration of that proverb. And that proverb is about the nature of life, not about greed per se. It's a story about life and what secures it. This parable provides us with a wonderful example of what you and I ought not to be. The person whose identity is so tied up with his or her possessions, or by extension, his or her status, or his or her achievements, or the lack thereof, can so easily end up unaware of the call of God and the need of the neighbor. The alternative is a life, as the text tells us today, that is rich towards God, one that is devoted to serving God daily, which of course also includes having one's eyes open to the needs of the neighbor. To that end, during this Nativity Fast, which we began last Tuesday, I'm going to issue an invitation to you. I'm going to issue an invitation for you to help me. I would like our parish, coupled with St. Paul Mission, to sponsor or to adopt, if you will, one of our case families for Christmas. We are currently serving in our city of El Segundo now some 32 households, and in those 32 households are 43 children. I would like to adopt a single-parent household, one parent with children. I would like to provide them food, the makings. They can prepare the meal themselves. I would like to provide them the makings for a Christmas dinner and for meals afterwards. And I would like to provide them with gifts. Gifts not only for the children, but also for the parent. I think it's important that the parent also receive something. Over the next few weeks, I will describe these people anonymously to you. And again, I invite you to assist me with this. The way in which I'd like you to assist me will be through the medium of Ralph's food cards, from Ralph's Market, specifically from Ralph's, because Ralph's cards can also be used at Food for Less, where their money goes further. And cash. Nothing wrong with cash. And or Target gift cards that we can use for purchasing gifts. Think of the abundance of things that you and I may have received over the years at Christmas. Or perhaps some of us will receive at Christmas this year. Think perhaps of the multiplicity of things we might have right now. Things that we take for granted. Without being too gross here, things such as toilet paper, which some of these people I serve do not take for granted. And then open your hearts and your barns to them, as I open my heart and my barn to them. I'd like to end this morning by quoting from St. Basil the Great's commentary on this parable of the rich fool, which we heard today. "What am I to do?" asked the rich man. It would have been so easy to say, "I will feed the hungry. I will open my barns and call in all the poor. I will imitate Joseph in proclaiming my goodwill towards everyone. I will issue the generous invitation. Let anyone who lacks bread come to me. You shall share, each according to the need, in the good things God has given me, just as though you were drawing from a common well." Let's enable these people to draw from that common well this year. May each of us open our barns, however large or small those barns may be, this Nativity.